Number 10. Patterns. Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to notice a pattern. What's that pattern exactly? Well, I'm starting to notice that maybe other Europeans were nicer than at least mainlander ones. I'll get into it. Was Vikings giving their women's rights messed up? No, of course not. I'm not a monster. However, you just gotta understand that a lot of other women in Europe did not share these privileges, like owning property, marriage rights. They even had the right to be warriors. While only a small fraction of women were involved, there are a couple sources that refer to female warriors, such as the War Maidens. Now, mind you, Vikings were coastal raiders, not so much a professional army, but still, it's about the freedoms, so you slay on, Valkyrie warriors, slay on. Number 8. Grooms, tombs, and drogers. Ladies, wasn't your wedding night beautiful, surrounded by friends and family, a nice meal, and if you've been married long enough, maybe even some bad hair, and tuxedos that went out of fashion the second you walked off the altar. All while being recorded on the first camcorders that were big enough to be bazookas. God, I miss the 70s and 80s. Well, Vikings had some weird things going on too. No, not those bright blue tuxedos. I never understood how that was in style. It was just really weird. Vikings had this tradition where the groom would raid his family's tomb and retrieve a ceremonial weapon. Afterwards, he would take a very hot bath and sweat out the scent of the tomb, I guess? I'm not really sure. Where then his hair was stylized and somewhere a symbol of Thor was placed on him. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a lot. I prefer our tradition of drinking too much in the sun before the wedding starts and falling over at the altar. That's a much better one.
Number 7. Torches. Moving straight from hygiene to whatever this is. Starting a fire is extremely hard. You'll see two guys rubbing sticks together in the movies and suddenly fire appears, but you know what? That doesn't work at all. The conditions for friction alone being enough to start a fire have to be absolutely perfect. The right temperature, the right humidity, the dryness, all of it. So this is why people decided to find other methods for starting fires, such as flint, a material that is fairly easy to find wherever you go. But with flint, you also need tinder, and this is where it gets a little weird. It always gets weird with tinder. The Vikings had a particular species of mushroom that they'd use for their torches, which they would carefully prepare and then boil in their own urine. Well, because, and it's honestly more likely that they found this out through trial and error, they probably didn't actually know the chemicals and all this, urine contains sodium nitrate, which burns real good, as it's a chemical neighbor of potassium nitrate, which is found in gunpowder. This was actually a fairly common technique for creating torches at the time, and, you know, just really cool. If not, like, you know, really weird. Number 6. The 81 Yule offerings. Christmas is coming, and if you're a Viking, that usually isn't a great thing. Not because of the Norse gods or anything, Vikings were actually pretty quick to pick up Christianity, but more because Christmas was the time where a pretty brutal ritual would take place. Specifically referred to as Yule, the ritual was estimated to have been in honor of family members that had passed away, and generally involved singing, dancing, and killing 81 men to offer their heads to the gods. Merry Christmas! Number 5. How to ward off Draugr. Draugr, for those who didn't play Skyrim, are a Viking denomination of the undead. It's presumed as a certainty that when a person is buried in the ground, they will rise from the dead as a Draugr. From there, they'll attack people, and everyone will generally have a bad time until the Draugr is killed via decapitation, dismemberment, or any act of making it just not move anymore. To prevent this from happening in the first place, Viking land burials were done extremely carefully. Straw would be placed under the body and scissors would be laying on the chest, while their toes were sewn together and nails were pushed through their feet. They would then deconstruct a portion of the house and take the corpse out through it, reconstructing it later, as Draugr were believed to follow the path back from their place of burial. They would then be entombed, and all of the items they'd owned that remained in their house would be turned upside down until their grave was magically sealed. Number 4. Berserkers. A denomination of shamans, berserkers were warriors trained to fight and channel various spirits into their body. There were 3 schools of berserker: the wolf, boar, and bear, each one serving a slightly different role. To train, these berserkers were sent out into the wilderness to become more in tune with nature, and also drive themselves insane in the process. This would supposedly imbue them with the strengths of their respective school of combat, and so when they were called upon to enter into Norse conflicts, they were supposedly given the ability to transform into their respective animal, ripping the opposing warriors to shreds. This account is shared both by Vikings and the victims of Vikings, though it is more than likely that this is just an exaggeration meant to imply the bestial behavior of a berserker when in a trance.
Number 3. Divorce process. Unlike other women in Europe, Viking women had the option to opt out of their marriages. A divorce for other women in Europe may just cost them their lives. Looking at you, King Henry VIII. However, the process of divorcing is rather awkward. Not that I would know, but I feel like a divorce should be somewhat of a private matter. Unless of course you're 90s trailer trash and you end up on Jerry Springer. That ain't my baby! That is not my baby! But even regular folks like you and me can still have their dirty laundry out to air, especially if your marriage is property and children to decide over. While not as messy as daytime television from a forgotten era, the Vikings made their divorces rather public, as that was the divorce process itself. The woman would have to call witnesses to the married bed, or rather just the home, and declare she was divorced. Imagine being pulled off a grueling day's work to be told the lady from the other side of the village is getting divorced. I'm gonna get back to my farm, lady. Jeez. Number 2. Far out, man. As if drinking copious amounts of ale and mead wasn't enough to upset a marriage, how about some recreational use of some wacky substances? Vikings were known for going in a berserker mode when in battle, a seemingly blind fit of rage that would see anyone or anything in the Vikings' way cut down without mercy. There may have been an answer for this aberrant behavior: mushrooms. Yes, that kind. Some scientists believe that these mushrooms with mind-altering effects grew in areas not too far from the Vikings, and once discovered would lead to some interesting results. Because a large man with a very sharp axe and a belly full of beer is exactly who should be consuming the same kind of mushrooms that may or may not make Pink Floyd's album sound 10 times better. Number 1. Naughty naughty. The chief came sailing into port today and said this isn't it. That's right, I did 2 chief jokes today because that's how messed up this is. Viking men of the past, I'm putting you in the naughty corner, bad Vikings. See, like previously mentioned, Vikings were more than just coastal pirates. They had villages, farms, etc. Just like the rest of Europe. But alas, they did do some pillaging. Oftentimes when going on a raid, one of the many things that was taken from other civilizations and villages was women. Oh yes, not just stocks of gold and grain, but the village's women too. Where they would be taken back to the Vikings, where they would be put into YouTube's least favorite S word for well, you could probably guess what for. Some were married off and some were probably put to work. This is why the Vikings are going in the naughty corner. At least the women could divorce, right? Number 10. Tar and feather. This is something my mom always said to me when I was being too loud, boisterous, or distracting her from a task at hand. I'm sorry, Mom, it's just what I do. Mind you, looking back, perhaps it wasn't my fault. Perhaps letting a hyper child eat chicken McNuggets and soda after watching a bunch of 007 movies was not the right choice, Mother. I used to be a big 007 fan. After running all over my house, my mom would say, "Son, if you don't settle down, I'm going to tar and feather you." Well, in the times of Vikings, this was a legit punishment and for legit criminals. The crook's head would be shaven and covered in tar, which even that alone sounds horrible. And then a poof, I guess you describe it, of duck feathers was thrown onto his stickiness. He then would have to run through a gauntlet and everyone would be tossing stones and bricks because, well, I guess tar and feathers weren't enough. If you made it out alive, then no further punishment was required. Number 9. Fines. Surprisingly enough, one of the most common punishments of the Viking era was fines. Nothing deters criminals like owing the governing body some cold hard cash. Except a lot of criminals don't really have any money, hence why they would steal in the first place, so owing money isn't exactly a great deterrent in my opinion. However, fines varied on the severity of the crime and who the person was or what the person was, and the law of the land really. Viking civilizations didn't exactly have a written law and would differ from different lands. All I know is that in Skyrim, which is loosely based on that of Scandinavian folklore and Norse mythology, the that when I get fined for committing a crime that I only did because I pushed the wrong button, I promise it was an accident, I immediately pay the fine and pickpocket it back. It's not so bad. You pay a fine, you get away. It's not so bad. Number 8, banishment. Hey, look over there, it's Skorgamor, said Ulfric, or someone of another Norse-like name like that. Don't worry, Norse sounds confusing to me too. What's not confusing, however, and very straightforward, but still pretty harsh, is banishment. If someone was found guilty enough of a crime, they could be banished from the village, and in time of wild beast disease and, well, other Vikings eyeing your village the same way flies look at cow manure, it was dangerous to be alone for that extended period of time. So some people were forbidden to come back into town and don the name Skorgamor. We'll go with that. Good luck in the winter, that's all I have to say. That's a tough life. Number 7, blood. Ladies, if your husband's dungeon crawling wasn't enough to creep you out, then the poor Viking women had more strange traditions for you. The Gothi, or basically a Viking priest, who makes the wedding happen, would often sacrifice an animal in front of the whole wedding to prove that he was capable of commencing a wedding, pouring blood on himself and oftentimes spraying the newlyweds, as it was seen as good for some strange reason. For immediate family, you might want to sit back as you're in the splash zone. And because this is the time before well-taught and understood sanitation, I'm sure there was a grand feast afterwards. I'm sure that won't make anyone sick, right? Number 6, quiet time. You might be thinking to yourself, okay, Big Ched, having blood sprayed on me at my wedding is kinda messed up. But you haven't made your chief joke yet. Does that mean there's something worse than impersonating 1976 Carrie at our wedding? Well, yes there is. And actually, I'm glad you asked. So, when two people fall in love and get married, and maybe have a little bit too much champagne, they go home to put on the final signatures of the marriage. If you catch my drift. Two young lovers dancing the devil's dance in the bedroom sheets for the first time because everybody waits until marriage. However, for Viking women, there's a tradition that us today would be mostly uncomfortable with. Or, I mean, at least if you don't have an OnlyFans, maybe not, I don't know. But when the young couple went back to do what young couples do, they had witnesses. Oh yeah, that's right. At least 6 witnesses apparently, just to make sure things go over smoothly. I moseyed on into town the other day and, you know what the chief said? That ain't it. Number 5, housewife. Ladies, I hear ya. No woman wants to be told by a man to cook, clean, and be a housewife. But for Viking wives, this was half the case. Not so much misogynistic as it was just really a necessity. While a lot of Viking life was more than naval raids and pillaging, and while women warriors most likely took part in said pillaging, the women in Viking civilizations did a lot of work at home. Cooking, making clothes, and a whole list of duties that I know I could never do. Truth of the matter is, Vikings were big burly fighters and still required the tender care of a woman. All patriarchy aside, imagine how hard life would have been back then without one another. As for today, I don't think you understand how hard it would be for me personally to sew a hole in my own clothes. Many of underwear have been lost to me, not being able to sew so long underwear. Number 4, score! I heard you work with the companions. What do? Fetch the mead? That's a Skyrim reference for anyone that's not sure what that is. It should come as no surprise to anyone that the Vikings enjoyed a little drinky poo once in a while, and by that I mean all the time. Famous for their beers, meads, and wines, Vikings drank to drink. For just about any reason, really. Alcohol played a big role in Viking society, as did in many other civilizations of the past. However, this may have had something to do with the mistreatment of their wives. Think about it for a minute. Has your dad ever been drinking a whole case of beer in the sun on a hot summer weekend, where he then proceeded to say things that he's been thinking but needed the liquor courage to say it? And when he said these things, was it not the most nonsensical thing you ever heard? Well, I'm sure that happened to the Vikings too. Just, it was freezing cold out and the men weren't wearing a fresh pair of white sneakers for mowing the lawn, which doesn't really make any sense when you think about it. This may be why women were allowed to leave marriages if they were mistreated. Number 3, drowning. Given the naval status of the Scandinavian nations at the time, it makes sense that they use water. It's simple, it's cheap, effective, and there's a lot of it. When a serious enough crime was committed, sometimes people were drowned, or in later terms they ran out of oxygen underwater, tried to breathe underwater, overpowered by the tide, or was left unattended by the city swimming pool, if you catch my drift. Number 2, trial by fire. There's water, now there's fire, of course. Well, if cold water was too much for you, then this should warm you up. Trial by fire was more of a punishment, and less of a lethal one, if you will. If you survived the ordeal, that meant God was on your side. Thus, they couldn't be guilty, because yeah, that totally works. The trial by fire included a couple different heat-based trials. No amount of red potion or Goron's tunic would get you through this. There was one version that saw people dip their hands in boiling water or oil, which right there, you ever seen those like Women's commercials where anyway. Walking across hot coals, which can be proven to be done without getting hurt. I saw it on Mythbusters once, so if it's on Mythbusters, it's just truth, folks, come on. Lastly, the one thing that I think is the worst is holding a hot stone or iron for a determined period of time. Yes, how long do you think you can hold onto a red hot iron? I'd say not long. Even with seconds of exposure, you would have close to 3rd degree burns, probably 3rd degree burns on the palm of your hands, and long before polysporin, painkillers, and toilet paper. Not a good combo. Don't you have a burnt hand you go to do that, you know? Ooh, that's not gonna be good. You're gonna get a little sick. Number 1, this is the worst one on the list, the blood eagle. The Vikings were very creative, to say the least. I just had to include this one, it's awful. And in the style of Mortal Kombat, of course, you take a crook, and you take his back, and you rip his rib cage out of his back. It was cut out from the chest and positioned in such a way that it looked like an eagle with its wings flying, just, you know, with a lot of blood, hence the blood eagle. After that amount of carnage, you would bleed out and experience excruciating pain. Not as common as other things on this list, it was saved for the worst of the worst, but yeah, it is the worst. No thank you.
Number 9. Teeth painting. When exhuming the many skeletons of Vikings that have passed throughout history, a remarkable detail was found throughout all of them. Notches of varying size, depth, and length were found to have been cut into the teeth of these ancient warriors. The reason for their existence was something of a mystery. Furthermore, comparing the style to historical Vikings, the name of the Danish king Harald Bluetooth suggests that his title may have been slightly more literal than initially thought. This would have been achieved through the application of a mixture of resins and dyes, though whether or not it was permanent would be hard to know for sure, since the evidence has long since rotted away. Number 8. Blonde hair. The image of the Viking as a blonde-haired, blue-eyed warrior is prolific and also wrong. While the majority of Vikings were observed to be blonde and described as such, this was actually due to an extremely early application of hair dye. That being said, this wasn't solely due to fashion, though blonde hair was considerably valued in Viking society. The method in which Vikings dyed their hair was through the use of lye, which contains potassium. Potassium can often strip the pigmentation off of hair, and if Vikings washed frequently, which they actually did, they were weirdly hygienic, then it would lead to their hair gradually being dyed blonde. A side effect of this was that lye was also extremely toxic to lice, which helped prevent outbreaks on ships.
Number 7. Outlawed. This one is kind of interesting. So oftentimes when choosing the punishment for a criminal, it came down to fines, banishment, and outlawing, and a lot of times all three. Outlawing went hand in hand with banishment. In a nutshell, it means you are no longer protected upon the laws of the land. So, should someone maybe want a little revenge, there's not much you can do. Should have committed that crime there, cowboy. Like I said before, this was oftentimes done to those who were banished, so not only were they tossed out of the village, but also not protected by the village anymore. Pretty much leaving the criminal to nature and whatever she has to offer. And we all know Mother Nature, she can be a little rough sometimes. Whew. Number 6. Rodeo. If you're gonna be dumb, you gotta be tough. This world is rough, if a man's gotta make it, he's gotta be tough. Wise words from a trailer park supervisor. Huh? This one is just crazy, stupid, and violent, so strap in, folks. There was a trial, or a way of passage, if you want to call it that involved Grease, a cow, and a criminal. You take the angriest cow in your herd, and you grease its tail up like a fat dude whose thighs have been chafing all day at a water park. The crook's hands would also be greased up. The cow was given a not too PETA-friendly poke from a farm tool, and the idea was while the cow was rightfully mad, kicking, stomping, and mooing, the crook would have to hang on. for as long as possible. If he did and didn't let go, then there was no charges. If he did fall off and slip and let go, then, well, so long von Schlorgenbergen, Florman or Ulfric. That's a Swedish name or something, I think. I don't know. Number 5, meat hook. Sometimes when given fines, it wasn't always cash value that was taken. Sometimes if the crime was heinous enough, the evildoer's property and items were taken instead. Well, sometimes folks didn't like having their stuff taken, which makes sense, they put up a fuss. No one likes their stuff getting taken. Just ask George Carlin, he knows a lot about that stuff. Everybody loves their stuff. In order for authorities to take possessions from the convicted, they would slice their ankles open, which, just talking about that makes me sick. And then for good measure, tie them up and suspend them from the ceiling from a beam in their house. No, not unaliving them, keeping them very alive, just severely hindering their movement and ability to say, hey, get your hands off my limited edition Obi-Wan Kenobi Lego set. That one's mine. Number 4, tree hugger. I hope you folks at home aren't eating during this video. It's about to get a little Mortal Kombat in here, if you will. Even though I watch videos when I eat. Carpet cleaning videos, anyone? Where's my lunch? You know what I mean? I do weird things like that. I don't know. The second most horrible sentence the Vikings could bestow upon their criminals and dredges of their society involved a tree. I'll get to the first one later, it's pretty heinous. It involved a tree, a knife, and a squishy rope. Squishy rope? What? Yeah, I'll get to that. Trees being great symbols of Norse mythology and culture, it made sense to do this here. Shout out to Yggdrasil. Oh, cool stuff. You take your perpetrator and you carve open his belly like a high school jack-o'-lantern contest, and you pull his intestines out, and you keep pulling them out till you've got enough to wrap around the tree. And you basically tie him there. Except you don't wrap him around the tree, he walks himself around the tree until he's out of string, like a sick yo-yo. Oh, gross. This was extremely painful and not quick at all, as humans can live for a couple hours without their squishy rope inside their belly. Not to mention it probably attracted wild animals for a quick and easy meal. Not a good way to go. Don't recommend that. That's sick. That's twisted.
Number 2. The bloat. The bloat was set as a ritual that would occur once every season at 4 set intervals in a year. But another could be organized if circumstances required it. The most well-recorded bloat was one performed by Sigurd Håkonsson. Detailed by Snorri Sturluson in the saga of Hakon the Good, this ritual involved a massive amount of human and animal sacrifices, as well as sacrifices of weaponry. Blood was also collected and splattered on the walls, altars, and participants. A feast would then be had and toasts would be made, first to the gods and then to the fallen. Number 1. Viking chief cremation ceremonies. We've all heard of Viking cremations, how they load their dead bro onto the ship and sail it out into the ocean, sending a flaming arrow into it so that they might be buried at sea. However, if it was a chief that died, things would get a little bit more screwed up and nasty. First off, one of the chief's girls would then volunteer or be volunteered to join the chief in the afterlife. She would then be made to get mad drunk and then would be made to sleep with every single man in the village. Seriously. She would then be strangled, stabbed, and loaded onto the boat, and the whole fire thing would go down. What can I say except what?